listen to this webinar. So what I think I'll do, I think it makes the most sense if I cover F1000 Research first, and then OKAD, just because OKAD is works on the infrastructure of F1000 Research. So to make sense of OKAD, it's easiest to go over F1000 Research first. There we go. So for the first part, it's just helpful to just go over why agricultural research is published in the first place. And so the whole point of publishing agricultural research is to share knowledge that will help the global community to address critically important issues, such as these listed from the Sustainable Development Goals, such as ending hunger, improving food security, increasing productivity in a sustainable manner, and protecting biodiversity, amongst other things. So academic publishing isn't that overly complicated an endeavor. So there's only really 3 controllable variables that publishers have that influence how research is shared. And so these are access, so the degree of access to scholarly content, the time it takes to publish scholarly content, and the quality of the content produced. So the current system that we have with most traditional publishing models is, in terms of access, we still, for the most part, have a subscription model, although open access has obviously been making very big inroads since its inception at the beginning of the century. But still, even regardless of whether it's a subscription model or open access model, for the most part, the only real research outputs that are produced or that are published are the articles, the sort of the finished end product. You don't really tend to see other sorts of research outputs published by these sort of journals, although this is changing with some of them, with the advancement of the open science movement. For the most part, they tend to be relatively slow in the speed at which that they publish agricultural research, or any research. I mean, this applies to all life science publishers. But for the most part, it can take quite a long time. So typically it's months, and that's if you're lucky and the first journal that you submit to actually accepts it without revisions. And of course, there's usually revisions, which reviewers might ask for additional experiments, which takes time. And then after all of that, then it can be quite common for the paper to still be rejected, and then the authors then submit to another journal, and it just goes on and on and on until they go down the chain of journals, as it were, until they find one that's is willing to publish their work. So for the most part, that takes months, but in some instances it can take years. I'm unfortunately named on one paper which is currently in this horrible cycle of being sort of bandied about to different journals, and it's just such an inefficient use of one, reviewers' times, but two, in terms of just essentially having this article which is completely inaccessible to anybody else for over a year now. And then of course there's quality as well. So this is incredibly variable from journal to journal, and it depends on their own peer review practices. For the most part, or at least what we've started to see in recent years is this concern about irreproducibility, where the results published in certain articles, when people try and replicate them, it's more common than you'd expect that these replications fail, either because the methodology is bad, or the reporting is poor, although those two issues are less common. The most common one is more if there's some sort of statistical error which influences the conclusions of the paper. And that might be a source of irreproducibility, but the thing is nobody can really test that because they don't often have the source data to test these, to test whether the statistical analyses were done correctly or if there weren't any mistakes in data entry, those sort of issues. And then, of course, there's peer review as well. So peer review is the main stamp of quality. So usually you assume that a paper is published in a journal, the journal has performed some degree of peer review on it. But because in almost all cases, this peer review is completely closed, it's non-transparent, so nobody can actually tell what the quality of the peer review is for any given article. Or indeed whether peer review has even been done at all in case of some predatory publishers that were exposed in the Bohannon article sting a few years back in Science. So that's the current system that we have for the most part. There's variability between various journals, of course. So what we'd quite like is to have essentially the opposite of what the traditional publishing system provides. So we'd ideally want one where all the content is open. So I mean that open in both senses of the term, in terms of being free to access, but also in terms of licensing, to have some sort of Creative Commons licensing associated with them to encourage reuse and redistribution. But also it'd be good to increase the access to a greater diversity of research outputs, so not just articles, but other things like the source data, the source code, the negative results or null results, which often don't get included in mainstream journals. Just to help stimulate ideas and to help balance publication records to try and avoid things like publication bias. In terms of time, we ideally want something which is very quick. We want research to be sort of accessible as soon as it's kind of been written down and created. And I mean, we especially need that. That's especially true for agricultural research, where researchers are trying to solve these critically important and urgent problems, such as ending hunger. And the longer it takes, so for each additional delay that there is to a particular article, that then creates a knock-on effect where the researchers who want to make use of that information are delayed accessing it, and in turn delayed from publishing their own results. And so you have this sort of knock-on effect where research ends up taking a lot longer to, or the goals that research tries to achieve take a lot longer to accomplish. And then finally, we ideally want articles to be published in such a way where their reproducibility can be tested. I mean, of course, there's always going to be some studies which are irreproducible for the vagaries of how nature works, but at least that this can be sort of tested by making data openly available so that others can analyze it. And also finally, to have the peer review known so that readers can assess the quality of the peer review, to make sure that it's being done appropriately, but also to actually know that peer review has been done in the first place. And so that's essentially what F1000Research is trying to do. So all those things on the bottom of the last slide. So first, in terms of improving access to knowledge, we try and increase the diversity of what sort of content is published openly on our platform. So just like any other journal, we publish articles. Well, these tend to be more diverse than typical journals. So in addition to original research articles, we also focus on publishing software articles which describe new software tools, data articles which are essentially descriptors of discrete data sets or databases. And the idea for that is that it helps researchers get credit for, and sort of incentive for them to release their software and their data for others to use them. And so by having this this paper associated with them, then people can cite that paper. That paper, if it passes peer review, we'll go on to this in a second, then it gets indexed, and so the visibility of it increases, so then more people find that data and find the software with which they can then use for their own purposes. So, but in addition to articles, we also publish code and the raw data associated with the article. So for the most part, we don't actually publish the code ourselves. We normally deposit it in a repository. In this case, is almost always a node just so that it can get a DOI, and so it can be archived, just so it's not, it doesn't just disappear because someone's decided to delete their GitHub account. And all the associated data is associated with the article as well. We publish some of it, but otherwise it can be published in. So the sort of data that we publish is sort of simple CSV files that we can visualize within the article. But if it's anything more complicated, then we publish it either in Dataverse or Figshare or Zenodo, depending on the visualization capabilities of each of those repositories, and depending on the data type that we're dealing with. That number on the data icon is, that's just an aside that from a study that published in PeerJ a couple of years ago, which found that, well, it was looking at the citation patterns of articles or studies that were focused on microarray data and over a 10-year period, and they found that on average, articles which made their microarray data open had about 9% more citations than those that didn't. I mean, that's across the 10-year period. But if you shorten that to a 5-year period, as in this case it was from 2005 to 2010, then that can increase up to 30% more citations. And so that's often something that I say when people are a little bit apprehensive about releasing their data because they're worried that somebody might analyze their data and get scooped, and therefore they lose out on citations. This is quite a nice study to provide as a sort of counterweight to our arguments that actually, in fact, by releasing your data, you actually can also get more citations. In addition to data and code, we also publish the peer reviews, which are associated with the article that are appended to the bottom of each article. So we try and get at least 2 to 3 referee reports for each article, and so this is quite a nice way of, one, being able to provide credit for peer reviewers. The reviews that they provide are all DOI'd and are independently citable, and we have seen some of these referee reports actually be cited in subsequent literature. And it also provides context for readers who are looking at the research, but want some extra additional context which only reviewers can provide, expert reviewers can provide. So they can find out exactly what an independent person's views are on the limitations or the strengths, or how to interpret it based on the wider body of knowledge that has already been published. Just otherwise in closed peer review, there's all this expert scholarly information is just discarded, which seems a bit of a waste. And then finally, we also publish slide presentations and academic posters, which are presented at conferences. And again, these are DOI'd and made citable. But the main purpose is just so that people who couldn't make it to the conference for whatever reason can still access this knowledge at a later date. So, just a reminder, this is essentially a schematic of what a traditional journal publishing model looks like. The article is submitted, then it gets peer reviewed. If it passes the editorial desk, then it gets sent off for a peer review. And then once the peer reviews come back, the author most likely has to make revisions, and this cycle might happen several times. Plus, each cycle actually takes quite a long time, often just because peer reviewers are incredibly busy people. And it's not necessarily usually at the top of their agenda to peer review a particular article. And so peer review is by far and away the biggest rate limiting step in terms of publishing times. And so just having the peer review before publication is the thing which prevents research from being made publicly available for months or even possibly years. And again, of course, this can go through multiple journals until you finally one that you find will accept it. So with F1000Research, we have a slightly different, well, we've essentially flipped the model. So when an article is submitted, it goes to our editorial staff who then check it to make sure that it's ethical, that it meets certain minimal reporting criteria. And then once it's past that, it gets typeset associated with the data, which is associated with it. That's a mandatory requirement for us, is that all data have to be made publicly available. And then it's published. And so that process takes about 7 days. So 7 calendar days. And then once it's published, we invite expert peer reviews from that community. And then they're encouraged to peer review it, and then as they publish their peer reviews, well, the peer reviews are published as and when the reports are submitted. And then, if all is good, so the reviewers give either two reviewers both approve the study, or if one reviewer approves of the study and 2 requests revisions. So sorry, that's meant to be 1 tick and 2 question marks. Then the paper gets indexed in multiple bibliographic databases. So if it doesn't reach that criteria on the first round, the authors can then version their articles. They can publish new versions, and they can do so indefinitely, either until they've addressed all the referees' responses. Until they address all the referees' responses and the referees are happy, and that they can then update their statuses. For posters and slides, it's a lot simpler. It's just submitting the poster or slide on our submission form. It's instantly visible, and then we check it, and if it's all in scope and it's all fine, then we mint DOIs, and then it's considered properly published. So just a comparison of F1000Research compared to sort of a more traditional publishing approach. So the F1000Research is post-publication peer review model versus a traditional pre-publication peer review model. So this is the sort of the length of time to publish an article in a typical agricultural journal. So as an aside, this data is based purely on 22 Elsevier agricultural journals. I'm not picking on Elsevier for any particular reason, just they're the ones who make that data most easily available. So the average amount of time that it takes from submission to final decision is about 80 days, so 80 calendar days. And then after final decision to publication is 28 days on average. That's if it gets accepted for publication. If it gets rejected, then the authors essentially have to do the same process again and possibly have to go through another 80 days. So with F1000Research, and the data on this slide is purely taken from our plant biology, ecology, and environmental science section. So F1000Research publishes across the life sciences. This is the one that's most relevant to agriculture. So it takes about 7 calendar days to publish the article from the submission. Well, that's the amount of time that it actually spends with the F1000Research staff. Before publication, obviously, depends on how quickly authors get back to us if we have any comments or questions. And then upon publication, it takes about 66 days for at least two reviews to come in. Again, these are averages as well. So this is slightly longer than some of our other subsections. Across averages for the entire life sciences, it's about 34 days from publication to getting 2 reviews. But in this case, it was the ecologists kind of increased the numbers somewhat, mainly because they're out in the field, and it's much harder to get hold of in certain times of the year. So just to compare the 2 approaches, so with this post-publication peer review model, the article is visible, shareable, and citable for over 100 days, more than a more traditional, conventional journal that follows a more traditional publication model. And I mean, just comparing these two sets, it's an extra 35 days of knowing exactly what the quality of research is, or at least what other experts think of the quality of the research. So yeah, the true reviews is about 66 days, but on average for the first review to come in, it's about 25 days. And so the trust within that the trust that readers can assign to that article kind of sort of ratchets up as each review comes in. So it's more sort of degrees of trustworthiness rather than or degrees of verification rather than absolute. And just to put this in the context of a real-world event, so these sort of slow publication times are just bad generally, just for research, the speed of the research cycle taken as a whole. But if you have a sort of an urgent scenario, such as some sort of virulent disease outbreak, I mean, it's hard to estimate case doubling times with agriculturally relevant viruses or agriculturally relevant pathogens. But the amount of time here represents about a 20-day case doubling time, which is perfectly reasonable for looking at diseases which affect humans, where it's much easier to calculate the case doubling time, such as Ebola or Zika. In fact, often they're even the doubling time is even shorter than 20 days. So you can see that by the time there'll be 6 or 7 case doubling times before a single article is published, before anybody can, if that article is actually about how to try and deal with these sort of pathogen outbreaks. So you can see that's just the publishing model that's traditionally used, just far too slow for getting that research out there. Whilst even though with the F1000Research model, the reviews haven't necessarily come in by that time either, at least experts who are working on on trying to contain, let's say, an outbreak, they're less in need of having research peer reviewed at that point, because they are experts themselves and they can use that information. They can make a snap judgment about whether that the research is valid and therefore can be used or not. So just a couple more slides. So finally, on ensuring quality. So we try and ensure quality by associating the raw data and the source code with any article which publishes findings based on the coding of the data. And so that allows other researchers to then test the conclusions and results and the findings of a particular article, and they can help verify it. So open sign peer review. So an example of this is on the right-hand side. It's quite small, so I'm not sure whether you can read it. But so this is an example of 3 referee reports that have been added to the end of one of our papers, and you can see they can be cited. It's all written out in full. All the names are there. All the affiliations. And so readers can go and see, let's say, yes, peer review has been done. Here's proof that peer review has been conducted. But further, I can actually read these reports and make my own mind up about whether they are fair or whether they're good quality or not. And then we have versioning, which allows the authors to be able to correct their mistakes if they find any after the initial article is published. So with a more conventional model where you don't have versioning, it's very, very hard to try and correct the literature. It's very hard to post retraction statements or notes of corrections. So it's a very long-winded process, and by then usually the misinformation is quite often spread to such a degree that it's hard to contain. So I'll just show an example. So this is one of our articles. So you can see on the right-hand side, this is a peer review matrix which shows the referee status of the article. So we can see that the version 1 didn't quite pass peer review, but they made some changes, which they summarize in this update box. And then the referees have been happy with the changes and have changed their statuses accordingly. Here you can see some of the data that's been visualized within the article. And this data, we ensure that this data is cited as well, so that it's sort of encourage data citation and the assignment of credit for data. So that's an example. You can have a look yourselves afterwards. And there's another site, F1000, which essentially tries to commission experts, sort of a body of experts to recommend their favorite articles and explain why they think that these articles are so good. And so we integrate that with F1000Research articles. So you can see this particular one got recommended, and so it has this little badge up here. And so users can click on it, and they can see why this particular expert has thinks that it's such a good article or a recommended article. So this comes to OKAD. So OKAD is a channel on F1000Research. So channels are essentially collections of content, so articles, data, software, posters, slides, and soon will also be sort of non-peer reviewable documents like meeting reports and technical reports and those sort of things. We're just building the infrastructure for that now. That should be ready by the end of summer. So OKAD in particular is a thematic channel. So you can have different channels. Some are thematic, some are sort of more organization-based, some are based purely on conferences. They're very flexible. So OKAD is there mainly to sort of help the open knowledge movement in agriculture and development. So the open knowledge movement is still in its relative infancy. Open access is only just 15 years old. So more open data and open source and open peer review type elements of the open knowledge movement and open educational resources as well are in some cases only a few years old, or at least they've only started to become increasing frequency within the last couple of years. So OKAD on one side publishes these articles and content which on research into sort of the technical issues that surround sort of open data, such as making it easier to the interoperability of different data sets for sort of publishing any sort of data or software type challenge. And also, so that's one element of it, and the other element of it is publishing, or it's essentially a mechanism with which people can share their experiences and their their open knowledge initiatives and see what went right, what went wrong, and to see what the outcomes are of those particular initiatives. And so that covers all of open knowledge, so open access, open data, open source, open education initiatives, and all article types are accepted. And everything is published in line with the F1000Research model, which is exactly why I went through the F1000Research model first. So everything that you've seen so far, OKAD publishes in exactly that way. So essentially publishes open knowledge in an open knowledge way. So it kind of practices what it preaches, it publishes what it preaches. And so its median time to 2 reviews is quite a lot shorter than the plant biology, ecology, and environmental science subjects, about 35 days from submission. So I'll just show you quickly. This is the URL you can go to. So this is just what the channel looks like in this case, OKAD. So you've got the articles on the left-hand side together with the review statuses, posters, slide presentations from OKAD and RDA and others. You can see those who are those in the community who are helping advise the channel, and also our advisory board on this side. So this was the other page I was meant to show, with the peer review matrix on the right hand side. And as you scroll down, you can see the data is visualized within the article. Some of these we add analytical tools on top of them, so readers can play around with the data and reanalyze it if they wish. And you can see the data availability statement, which we put on all our research articles. And you can see the referee reports down at the bottom. You can read them in full. And that's pretty much it on the presentation. I've lost the...
I can get back the main presentation if you want.
Yeah, that'll be good if that's okay.
Okay.
Oh, wait, no, I think I see it. And then there was just the very last slide just saying where you can find agricultural research that's published on agricultural research, both of these two links. But I'm sure there'll be plenty to discuss. So we'll call it a day there, and then we can talk about sort of specifics and individual points.
Okay. So thank you very much, Thomas, for this very interesting and clear presentation.